Thank you so very much for being here today. We are very, very proud that you've taken your Saturday and come down here to the U.S. Cannabis Conference and Expo to join us. This, for me personally, is a very special treat. The gentleman that is coming up on the stage next, I am extremely humbled, always in his presence. And he is a very humble man, but I don't think that it's possible. I think words elude me sometimes when I try and describe the work that this man has done for cannabis. You know, a lot of us, can I see the hands of advocates and activists in the room? So you will absolutely understand when I tell you activism is not easy. Being an advocate and doing it well and dedicating yourself to it can be taxing and challenging in so many ways. But when you're someone like our keynote today, Mr. Vivian McPeak, this gentleman has been one of the longest running and most vocal cannabis policy reform activists in the world. He is the founder of the Seattle Hempfest. Can I see hands that know what that is? A lot of people in here, great. How many people have been to one before? So you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say it is an unbelievable experience, unlike anything I personally have witnessed on the planet. And I've been to a lot of events and a lot of cannabis events, but I can truly say that it is a monumental feat that is performed by this gentleman and his staff every single year. And I'm not going to go into that, I'm sure he will, but I wanted to just tell you guys the humility that I feel in this man's presence is, I am sometimes just completely awestruck at you, Vivian, I am. And the reason why is when you look at hundreds of thousands of people that attend his event over the course of a weekend, and where prohibition is suspended for those 3 days, where utter freedom for cannabis exists, it is because of the vision of this man and the team that he's put together. And I am honored to welcome to the stage Mr. Vivian McPeak.
Dear, you know, you could have just kept talking because I was enjoying that a lot. I'd like to meet that guy, whoever it is you just introduced. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with that event taking place downstairs. I want to thank Darren and Brandy Babin for inviting me to this and for changing my life, bringing me into cannabis radio and everything. And I extend the same reverence back at you guys. You know, it's great to be in a room with so many hemposapiens, and I'm a hempath, I'm empathic, and I'm telling you right now, I can tell that we're going to raise the temperature in here, and it's going to be, we're going to make some hempstery. Because, you know, I mean, I couldn't hemp myself, I just had to say that. But allow me to hemp present. I have a prepared speech, unfortunately, because first of all, I've got a chronic illness, and every once in a while it kind of rears its ugly head, and I have so much that I want to say today that I want to make sure that I got it all in here, everything like that. So, you know, I'm just so honored to be participating in this very special industry event. You know, we're from Seattle, Washington, and I've been all over the world at cannabis events, different continents and everything. And one thing I've learned is that the cannabis community is a beautiful, amazingly beautiful, tolerant, artistic, conscious community everywhere that I go. Let me move this a little bit farther so it doesn't pop. Can you guys hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, walking through this event downstairs, going to every single booth, it's just always the most positive and beautiful and conscious folks. And so it's such an honor to be involved in this wonderful global community. So, you know, increasingly, it feels like we're at a major watershed moment for cannabis. Several months ago, former Speaker of the House John Bonner flipped and came to the light. Chuck Schumer filed a legalization bill on 4/20. My state's Governor Jay Inslee bragged on cable TV, "We have the best weed in Washington." CNN's chief medical correspondent Sanjay Gupta wrote that cannabis could help manage the opioid crisis. And Cheech and Chong complained on Colbert, partly in jest, that pot's just not edgy anymore, all in the same week. A THC change is taking place right now in terms of the popular profile of ganja, and this part is bittersweet. The last generations who've been most affected by negative prohibition propaganda, as well as those that work to end prohibition, are slowly dying off. Those pot reform pioneers that have left us work to see this day, and they will not have the opportunity to experience the fruits of their labors and revel in the new paradigm that they helped to create. But they leave a bold new world in their wake. I'm a professional activist. I do operate a business, though. I'm the president of a federal nonprofit that has a small hemp boutique and head shop, and that produces our annual free speech event with an $800,000 operating budget. Seattle Hempfest, entering its 28th year, is, as far as we can tell, the world's largest annual cannabis event, and it is the largest annual free speech event in the United States. The event features over 100 guest speakers from the cannabis industry and reform movement, and 80 musical acts in 4 stages. The 1.3-mile downtown waterfront expanse is dotted with 400 arts, crafts, food, and informational vendors with an annual attendance of minimum of 100,000 people. And as someone that's been at the front lines of the reform movement for 30 years with a foot in both camps, I might come today with a slightly unique perspective tempered by my years as a community organizer. I am, through my work, reminded that while great strides have been made, there lies a lot of heavy lifting still ahead for the movement and the industry. On our way to the airport to come here, we passed several brick and mortar storefronts of state legal retail cannabis stores. You show your ID to enter, then you're met with shelves chock full of packaged cannabis in a multitude of strains. There's oil, shatter, dabs, all kinds of concentrates and edibles of various kinds. You show your ID, first when you go in, and then a second time at your point of purchase. Then you get in your car and you drive away, and you don't even need to look in the rearview mirror. A brave new world indeed. It could be deceiving to some to engage in the industry, cultivating or selling retail cannabis day in and day out, or cultivating, processing, or marketing industrial hemp. It might be easy for some people to forget that millions of Americans are still subject to the full authoritarian Iron Curtain of prohibition. But we're all fighting back in our own ways. For cannabis business owners operating visible retail operations in American communities, it's a very powerful form of normalizing. Similarly, growing and marketing hemp is a powerful educational tool in a nation where many citizens still don't know much about hemp or the pivotal role that hemp played in our national heritage. I have nothing but respect and admiration for my fellow entrepreneurs who are blazing a trail through the jungles of ever-evolving state regulations, and I'm in awe of the accomplishments that we've all made so far. What an amazing industry we all belong to. Despite the fact that most cannabis businesses, by and large, lack access to basic banking services, having to conduct business in cash, billions of dollars of sales are currently being generated, as well as tax revenues that are paying for schools, education, research, and other important programs. We always knew that rather than being the gateway to hard drugs, cannabis could be a gateway to economic prosperity for many and for our country. We can just get to a level playing field with the rest of the business world. These cannabis dollars that are being made while cannabis businesses are restricted from making routine business deductions on their taxes are still significant. Cannabis businesses are meted out exorbitant licensing fees and tax burdens while competing with black market competition that's not impacted by those obstacles. Still, cannabis industry stocks are being generated, opening up new horizons for the investment community as cannabis businesses go public. it's important to point out again that those Americans, including those in this room who are engaging in the cannabis industry, are what I would call economic activists, or rather industry activists, taking financial and personal risks, pushing the envelope, and normalizing cannabis in ways that traditional shoe-leather community activists could not achieve. Despite great risks, cannabis businesses are taking it to the next level. In fact, taking it to the next level is what I want to touch on today. In the process, my words might evoke as many questions as answers. Questions like, what responsibility do those have who are profiting from the sweat equity, risk, and sacrifices that community activists and medical cannabis patients contributed to over many decades to create an environment where these business opportunities could exist? What moral obligation do Americans doing well off of cannabis have to wield their influence, wealth, and community profiles to advocate for those American men and women still languishing in jails and prisons for the exact same thing? And there are many more questions that we could ponder. Do those participating in the industry have any responsibility to market edible and drinkable products that are actually nutritious and arguably not a health threat? How important is establishing racial, gender, and other social equity concerns at the foundation of the nascent cannabis industry? And how important is it for the cannabis industry to support and promote further reforms when these investments and business interests will not be safe and secure until full federal legalization occurs? And I realize a question that you may have in return as I go through all of this stuff is, how do you expect us to accomplish all of these things? The answer is I do not. What I ask is that we're all mindful of these ideas and that we all look for those things that resonate the most with our values and look for the things that apply to our own businesses considering our own resources. While I would not presume to have all the answers to these questions, I do, after 3 decades working with thousands of community activists, have strong opinions. I believe it's the duty of veteran cannabis reformers to humbly bring these issues up in the formative days of this political, cultural, legal, and economic revolution that we're participating in. Of course, folks in the industry have a first and foremost a primary responsibility to their investors, shareholders, and employees to generate revenue and profits. That's just a given. As well as an inherent responsibility to the consumers of cannabis to provide them quality-grade cannabis in all legal forms. But do the moral and ethical obligations end there? I believe they don't. I want to see the cannabis industry achieve its full transformational potential. And ever the idealist, I believe that full potential extends beyond the trillions of dollars of profit, job creation, tax revenues, and philanthropy that we all know is around the legalization end. I believe that cannabis industry best practices that address things such as packaging, import of non-cannabis products, decoration, transactions for business-related expenses, etc., should include moral and ethical considerations that are unique to an industry that's emerging from the smoldering ashes of prohibition like a phoenix. In those states and regions where significant sacrifices of reformers have taken hold. A look into the future conjures a time when cannabis is not only marketed and distributed across state lines, but something that has become a dominant global commodity. The billions of dollars being generated today are taking place while the herb is still a federally prohibited substance that's confined to state lines, with full decriminalization taking place within only 9 states and the District of Columbia. Just imagine that, as I assume most in this room have already done, when the chains are off and cannabis goes global, with its multifaceted applications in agriculture, recreation, construction, medicine, environmental preservation, mediation and restoration, and personal lifestyle, that cannabis will be an industrial Medusa. It will have tentacles in some area of everybody's life. And that's without factoring in the multitude of ancillary products and services generated by this new emerging industry. Things such as, but not limited to, security, lighting, weights and measures, point of sale, seed-to-sale tracking systems, processing equipment, packaging, and nutrients. Down the road, cannabis could very well end up being the world's most prolific and pervasive mega industry, having some cannabis item, product, or related service playing a role in the everyday activities of billions of people. This early nascent stage of the evolution of this industry is the time to infuse comprehensive long-term moral and ethical best practices into the model that we're creating, a model that will influence the global industry to come. So what do I mean? What do I mean by moral and ethical best practices? I feel that it starts with gender and racial equity. It begins with employment, managerial, and ownership opportunities for historically hamstrung and marginalized communities, and I include those who have been the most severely incarcerated for cannabis offenses. Communities of color are being shut out to some degree, yet they paid the steepest historical price, being targeted disproportionately and and receiving obscene sentences compared to white Americans. How can we balance out that inequity in a way that's fair to all parties? Los Angeles-based Rashawn Everett, for example, from the Greenwood Project, is doing just that thing with a training and education program that prepares people of color for participation in all levels of the cannabis industry. While many women are emerging as bold and innovative leaders in this industry already, others still complain that they're hitting what has been termed by some as the glass ceiling. And we need to outreach to those who play critical roles in our society. I'm simply thrilled that this event offers free entry for military vets, firefighters, policemen, EMTs, and local teachers. That's a commendable and brilliant move, as these critical public servants often have a skewed view of our industry and culture. Opportunities for our veterans to benefit and participate in the cannabis industry is also an important consideration when creating these practices. This especially applies to disabled vets, and in fact, the disabled community in general should also have access to opportunity in the industry. Moral and ethical best practices and industry standards should additionally apply to environmental considerations. Throwaway packaging, energy consumption, chemical pesticide and herbicide use, water consumption, and other environmental impacts of the cannabis industry must be examined, and innovations to current practices must be generated. And to some degree that's happening, but with climate change approaching, and with fresh water supplies in some regions dwindling, and other more traditional industries vying for those very resources, the imperative to adjust to these considerations with new innovative techniques increases. And you expected the mere smell of cannabis growing to be such a controversial issue, but apparently it is an issue as restrictive smell regulations are being applied to cannabis production, where exceptions are usually drawn for the producers of other traditional agricultural products. This issue may need to be addressed in some way as well. As the industry evolves, there undoubtedly will be billion-dollar corporations established that may rival those of the tech industry in scope and breadth. When that happens, I would hope that those companies will consider things such as childcare for workers and transportation benefits, as well as things like project labor agreements to utilize union labor when that time comes. But until we get there, we'll have to overcome some of the obstacles we've been enduring for decades. And that includes what some call pot shaming. Interestingly, pot shaming seeks to outlive prohibition as canna-bigotry dies hard, especially when there might be some who feel there might be a few more dollars to be eked out for the legal industry if mainstreaming is not happening quickly enough. It's painful, and I sometimes see this. It's painful to see former black market entrepreneurs who've made the transition to state legal retail or production condemning those still participating in black market as criminals, although it's understandable. Granted, these white or gray market folks, they need to make a return on their investments and build strong business structures, while black market competition can pose a nagging obstacle to the legal market. Still, the characterizations might be difficult to take. But the pot shaming doesn't end there. It goes much deeper. It's been institutionalized by Prohibition's state-sanctioned campaign of hate, scapegoating and demonizing that's existed for the equivalent of a human lifetime. This pot shaming increasingly delves into the same tired old cultural associations and relegations that Prohibition has generated for decades. These damaging memes were largely not true then, and they don't hold true today. A recent media article picked up by my hometown newspaper titled "Legal Marijuana Industry Tries to Shake Stoner Stereotypes" gives a hint to the direction a few players in the cannabis industry are choosing to take. Now, admittedly, cannabis must be mainstream for the industry to achieve its potential. It's very understandable that retail outlets choose to eschew the counterculture trappings that have historically been associated with ganja throughout Prohibition. Any reasonable person would understand why a pot business might not want Bob Marley or Grateful Dead posters on its walls. It's just common sense that businesses would seek to avoid culturally alienating mainstream customers, especially when fighting against the hurtful stereotypes that have been used to justify Prohibition all along. So why evoke those stereotypes at all? I don't think that's necessary. I don't think we need to exclude anybody. We need to include everybody else. And so my point is does mainstreaming really require shame-streaming? I don't think so. But some apparently do, despite the fact that things are already advancing at a stunning rate and appears to be accelerating. Why attach ourselves to prohibitionist messaging as an industry and insinuate that there's something wrong with the very culture and identity of those who bore the brunt of prohibition and literally refused to cave in, keeping the cannabis flame alive for so long and virtually paving the way for this industry to exist at all? As someone who's from the old guard canna culture, I can tell you that stuff is pretty painful when we see it. And it's it's not pervasive at all, but it is happening, and I'm worried that as the cannabis industry grows, becomes more powerful, more mainstream, that will linger on. The next phase of my lofty premise concerns canna equality for both moral purposes and the cause of justice, but also to carve a path for a vibrant, energized industry that can fully compete in the traditional marketplace. Cannabis users require equality of opportunity with these consumers of alcohol, tobacco, and other adult industries. We must fight for public consumption liberties that the consumers of alcohol and tobacco enjoy despite the known health dangers posed by both of those substances. And the cannabis industry requires equality with those other industries as well. We will never have the opportunity to achieve its full potential. How much less alcohol would be sold in America if there were no bars or lounges or alcohol sold at eating establishments? There are many ways that the subtle or not so subtle shaming of cannabis manifests in American society, and it all has its roots firmly planted in the way mainstream media approaches the subject and how it characterizes cannabis users. Take, for example, the giggle factor. For some reason, the media has not been able to resist the curious urge to embed a double entendre in the caption of cannabis-related news stories. For decades, we've seen headlines such as, "Is legalization just a smokescreen?" or "State delivers harsh toke of reality to cannabis activists." There's really no other subject that gets that same treatment from the media. There's been something inherently funny about all things cannabis to non-users. For decades, pot activists have been subjected to ridicule and the pot shots, subtly sometimes, and anyone who's been out in public collecting signatures or generally advocating for legalization has heard all the jokes that don't seem to apply to the enthusiasts of other substances. People in the hemp goods industry are also met with an endless stream of jokes, and they're harmless jokes from non-users. "Can you smoke this hat?" While it's nice that cannabis seems to bring a smile to the faces of many people, and that is nice, people that are not a part of the culture, the jokes are still born from a subtle form of prejudice and dismissal akin to that which other racial, cultural, and religious minorities have historically received. Frequently, in media interviews or political talk shows, when a commentator wants to characterize someone's ideas or concepts as absolutely childish or asinine, they'll say things like, "Well, I don't know what he's been smoking, but," as if any thought generated from a pot smoker has no possibility of credibility or accuracy. Never have we heard something like, "Well, I don't know what she's been drinking, but," even though alcohol, for example, can cloud a person's judgment and decision-making. Let's forget the reality that some of the greatest modern music, art, and writing, in my opinion, has been generated by people who are ravenous consumers of cannabis, or that the supposed deadbeat stumble-bum slackers who smoke or eat cannabis have managed to force some form of decriminalization in more than half of America's states. At Seattle Hempfest, where we spend 10 full days, sun up to sundown, on site, building, operating, tearing down, hauling out, and cleaning up our more than 1 mile long event site, we have a saying: "Imagine what we could do if we were motivated." Underlying the cultural judgments is a litany of double standards. While tobacco and alcohol are both responsible for thousands of deaths annually, Americans who imbibe these substances are not in any way exposed to the degree of prejudice and bigotry that cannabis users have grown to expect. Pot smokers have known damned well that they better hide their use if they're looking to find a job or housing because of the stigma attached to cannabis is so great that even casual users will be judged as if they're addicts. Cannabis users still risk the loss of child custody in many communities, and those who are arrested and convicted of pot crimes are routinely required to complete drug treatment and education programs, whether or not they have exhibited any history or signs of addiction. Millions of Americans routinely and irresponsibly expose their children to tobacco or alcohol use. But if a cannabis user does the same thing, they may risk criminal conviction or be threatened with the loss of child custody. If a small child eats a pack of cigarettes or drinks a bottle of grain alcohol, it could kill them. But God forbid, should a child get a hold of a cannabis edible, which cannot kill them at all, it's treated like a life-threatening situation by law enforcement, poison control, and health professionals. Nobody should ever allow access to cannabis to children. That is important, and it's a given. Especially edibles. But we should also be honest and realistic about the dangers. Many people do not know that a child could eat a full ounce of cannabis buds or leaves and not even get a buzz. That's because cannabis must be decarboxylated, burned, or heated to have any psychoactive effects. Raw cannabis will not get a human being high. But unlike tobacco or alcohol, cannabis is required to be sold in child-proof packaging. Cannabis enthusiasts have been treated on par with some of the most violent criminals in society for decades, despite the fact that the dangers of cannabis pale in comparison with most other mood-altering substances. All pot use is considered abuse by some healthcare professionals and treatment experts. Many medical patients are required to sign treatment contracts in order to obtain pharmaceutical medications that stipulate that the signers will be cut off from their meds should they use cannabis or generate a dirty UA. These folks concerned about a stifling effect from the supposed image problem are responding to the way that some media continues to associate cannabis with the counterculture, as if that's an indication of some dismissive factor or some relegation of cannabis use to the lower social classes. Long after cannabis is legal, these cultural associations, prejudices, and denigrations will continue in some quarters, like the controversy and media sensation that followed video footage of the blind former Tesla chairman, Elon Musk, taking a single hit off a joint in an interview with Joe Rogan. If Musk had taken a swig off some tequila or Everclear, nobody would have batted an eye. I reiterate that we do need to mainstream and move beyond the misleading caricature image of the hazed-out, tie-dyed, dreadlocked couch potato. But we can best fight against the prohibition-generated images of cannabis by creating alternative identities with new associations and imagery. And that's already starting to happen as competing images of the entrepreneur, the elderly patient, or the industrial cannabis farmer continue to emerge in the public arena. Activist and entrepreneur Ophelia Chong became frustrated that the only stock photos of cannabis users available online were of white folks. So she started a company called Stock Pot Images to create a balance. On her website, you will find all kinds of shots of people of color engaged in cannabis activities. These kind of diverse, positive images contribute to our long-term opportunity to defend against the unequal treatment that cannabis users and enthusiasts still endure today. And we can expect more of the usual news articles that focus on the supposed dangers of cannabis, citing issues like stone driving, suicidal teens, a propensity to schizophrenia, and other suggested health dangers. There are serious considerations that warrant some merit, and these are some of them. Arguably, and arguably not. Certainly nobody should ever drive impaired, for example. That's extremely important. Driving is literally the most dangerous thing that most Americans do on a daily basis. But these dangers will be presented as if they're taking place in a vacuum. The implication in many of these pieces will be that legalization creates societal problems that are so threatening that perhaps prohibition is just sensible and reasonable policy. And as everybody in this room completely understands, prohibition is not good policy for several reasons. And one striking reason may be that prohibition does not eliminate or even really reduce cannabis use. If the purpose of pot prohibition is to prevent the use of cannabis by Americans, it could be held up as one of the biggest and most expensive failed policies this nation has ever embarked on. I think that most Americans should use cannabis. Everybody has an endocannabinoid system, and cannabis has health effects, and whether people are using it recreationally or not, more than likely they are self-medicating as well in some way. Then there are the racial inequalities that result in a disproportionate degree of people of color and economically underprivileged walling in jails and prisons. And then there's the constitutional erosion that prohibition has created. People had their homes and cash taken, often even without a conviction. Cannabis users have been profiled, surveilled, wiretapped, and in New York, stop and frisk policies have targeted people of color aggressively. Cannabis growers have had helicopters fly over their land with paramilitary troops dropping down, AK-15s in hand. Infrared heat-seeking technology has been used to identify cannabis crops or the heat growing from grow lights emanating from the roofs of houses. These policies have often treated pot smokers and pot users like they're second-class citizens subjected to a heightened degree of disproportionate enforcement, punishment, and persecution. Just look at the percentage of Americans in jails and prisons for cannabis. And we all agree, I'm sure, the biggest reason that prohibition is bad, however, is that there's nothing criminal about getting high or feeling relaxed. And of course, the prohibition of industrial hemp might be one of the more absurd, illogical policies that's ever existed. We all know that hemp needed to be suppressed so that other industries could enjoy monopolistic market control. I speak of things like the nylon industry, the timber industry, and of course, the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry. The latter bleeds into the pharmaceutical industry. We desperately need to remember that medical cannabis patients who frequently have seen their advances thrown into the cannabis in exchange for state-licensed recreational adult use should absolutely have been prioritized. I hope folks here in Arizona won't let that happen like it has in my state of Washington, where we had a vibrant community-based dispensary system virtually scrapped to make way for state legal retail cannabis. Plant counts and the amount of cannabis a patient can possess were actually greatly reduced in the process of legalization. There was a move that many of us veteran activists this was a move that many of us veteran activists thought that was downright shameful. We even have draconian advertising restrictions in my state that make it impossible for patients to get critical information they need to make fully informed health choices regarding their medicine. In my state, it's legal to homebrew, make your own wine, or even make limited amounts of hard liquor. Yet our legalization model does not allow citizen home grows for non-patients. All the cannabis culture has been asking for is equality with everyone else. I no longer use the word legalization because what I've seen in my state is commodification or commoditization. I want equality, and so now I use the word equality more often than not. And if somebody screws up on pot and does something wrong, they should pay for it. But the consequences should be in proportion to the act and equal to comparable consequences for the users of other substances. The simple act of getting high should never be a crime. Lately, there's been a shift that started in the way that media reports about cannabis and the way local governments have responded. Now that the recreational weed industry is a billion-dollar industry, a sense of legitimacy is slowly being established. And that's being reflected in a more serious tone in many recent media news reports. Activists are idealists by nature, but we're also opportunists. We identify obstacles to justice and fairness, and then search for opportunities to overcome and transform them. In the words of the immortal Tom Petty, we stand our ground and we won't back down. And I bring some of these things up because there are some things happening that are already taking place in our community that disturb me. We've witnessed things like medical cotton candy being marketed. Somebody came to me and they said, "We've got medical cotton candy. It has THC in it." I contend that there's no such thing as medical cotton candy unless the consumer is in the midst of a diabetic coma. Most medibles are chock full of bad sugars and bad oils because that's the cheapest and quickest way to get and keep products on the shelves. The last thing people with cancer or an immune system disorder needs is concentrated cane sugar or maple syrup. Sick people need wholesome, healthy, nutritious items. Adding CBD or THC into something unhealthy does not make it medicine. I realize that CBD-infused Coca-Cola, which is just announced, is a fast track to the mainstream. And in some ways, it's a positive sign in development. There's simply no stopping that stuff anyway. But how can we expect cannabis consumers to make smart, healthy choices if those products are not available to them? We can use our own participation to influence an industry that is just forming. Each one of these issues should at least be on our radar. Beyond the prohibitionist characterizations I've outlined, cannabis has actually been associated by those familiar with its effects with a higher level of consciousness or higher awareness. For many, cannabis has been associated with a peaceful benevolence. Is there another political or social movement that's achieved this much, successfully advancing against federal illegality, winning this many political and legislative salvos against the strongest and most formidable government in the world, with nary a shot fired or an act of violence associated with the cause? We've only been on the receiving end of violence, and it's been state-sanctioned usually. So there's both an opportunity and a responsibility for cannabis entrepreneurs to champion values that will strengthen the industry, enrich our communities, define the character of our culture, and create credibility where there might be a lack thereof. I file it under saving the planet for fun and profit. And while that's happening, people are suffering from the crimes and the inhumanity of prohibition in America and beyond. I'm fortunate enough to have a weekly podcast on cannabis radio called Hemp Present. I call it a podcast. In my 150 some odd shows I've done, I've had the pleasure of interviewing a varied and diverse field of advocates, attorneys, activists, authors, patients, and parents of medical cannabis patients. I've interviewed parents of children with epilepsy or Dravet syndrome that desperately require cannabis oil to stave off potentially life-threatening seizures. Some of the children were non-verbal before they received cannabis, and others were non-ambulatory. I've had guests on my show, a parent or a patient of a cannabis child from Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and England. I've also heard from listeners in Sweden and Brazil. All of them have told stories identical to the horror stories we hear every day here in the US. The only difference is their accents. Prohibition is raging all over the world, much thanks to the United States and our pressure through the UN, demanding that treaties include draconian drug policy similar to ours. 2 of these parents I talk about had to administer CPR to their child while they waited for an ambulance because the cocktail of pharmaceuticals, phenobarbital, Valium, Tegretol, Dilantin, etc., put their children into cardiac arrest. One child had to wear a bib to protect them against drooling. That parent thought it was a manifestation of their kid's illness, only to find, once they switched to cannabis, it was the medication causing the drooling. These people reveal that this is a global struggle. This is a global struggle, and we really need to finish the job. So I hope that everyone will please remember the activists still fighting in the trenches. Those who are experiencing some return on investment or doing well in the cannabis industry might be mindful that the advances that the reform community has forged has been achieved with a massive lack of resources. There was never any real money behind the efforts, other than out of pocket and a smattering of public support. With all the Canada dollars going around, funding has mostly dried up for many nonprofits and reform advocacy organizations. Now that billions of dollars are being generated, those who can do well by tithing some of it back to those entities still fighting with the tip of the spear, so the task can be completed. And perhaps even more important today, support statewide ballot initiatives and those elected representatives supporting full national reforms. Everyone will benefit from full, total, worldwide legalization, especially the cannabis industry. Speaking of reforms, the event I work with, the Seattle Hempfest, has instituted over the past several years, 30 years almost, a variety of what we call community value programs that have been incorporated into our moral and ethical best practices. We are cognizant of the power and influence that our event has, with tens of thousands of people attending and participating in the event. We believe we have the responsibility to act as community leaders and offer examples of responsible advocacy in business. Naturally, no business could incorporate all the things I've detailed today, the social equity, racial and gender equity, the environmental concerns and those type of things. But each business can identify what it can do, what best practices are within its scope and resources. And that's what we've done in Seattle at Hempfest. At Seattle Hempfest, we spend $16,000 on bringing an outside Oregon crew and $13,000 last year on disposal annually to clean every stitch of our event. We operate a large triage operation that sorts 500 cubic yards of refuse annually generated by Hempfest for compost, recycle, and landfill. We literally go through after the event and pick up every visible cigarette butt in the expanse of the site, which is 1.3 miles long. We maintain an extensive anti-graffiti removal kit, as well as a toxic spill kit that we keep on site. We hire Seattle Fire Department medics and an ambulance in addition to our own volunteer first aid team. The medics that we hire bring AEDs or heart defibrillators, but since our event is so long and narrow, with thick crowds blocking the pass during the height of attendance, we rent extra AEDs to place at various locations. Most events don't even have a heart defibrillator. Some events don't know what it is. We have a volunteer voter registration team that's registered over 10,000 Washingtonians to vote at our event. We have developed multiple pages of emergency evacuation protocols that we train our staff in, as well as a Code Adam protocol for lost children. We operate a lost and found program, and each year after the event, we spend a full 30 days tracking down the owners of purses, wallets, IDs, and items of value. We return around 5 to 10 wallets to their proper owners every single year. We use responsible messaging from our stages, repeatedly stating that the police and other first responders at the event are not our enemies. In fact, many are our friends, and that they work with us through the permitting process all year. We take an approach where we have no human enemies, targeting policies, not personalities. We try not to attack specific individuals because we want them to come around in their opinions. And alienating them by making it personal could create obstacles to them opening their minds. We maintain a trained internal security force called the Seattle Hempfest Safety Patrol that works our event, divided into sectors, to keep the peace and enforce permit regulations and event policy. This day and age, after all these years, the police don't enter our event unless we ask them to. They've got copies, they've got our radios, they monitor our stuff, and if we need them, they're there. But they actually trust our security with 100,000 people to monitor and to patrol the event. Our vending booths have large numbered booth tags in the color of their sector because our event is broken into 9 colored different sectors. They're numbered and colored, and these boot tags are required to be visibly attached to them. This enables first responders to get their bearings and quickly navigate the long event that's confusing to anyone that doesn't know the landmarks. This can save critical time in a medical emergency or police incident, and it has. We have proactively worked with the representatives of the Seattle Animal Shelter to produce prevention and awareness messaging to educate attendees about the dangers of pets left in hot cars and other pet owner issues. For their protection, Hempfest is a no pets event. But of course, Hempfest strictly follows all local, state, and federal service animal laws. Hempfest has instituted a number of safety procedures for its 4 stages, including a ban on any objects being thrown from its stages, a ban on animals or babies on stage, ear protection warning signs, and emergency stage clear directives. Not long ago, we had a Jimi Hendrix impersonator named Randy Hansen set his guitar on fire, break his guitar into little pieces, and I'm watching all this, from the side of the stage, off the stage, and then I see him pick up what's left of the guitar and heave it about 30 feet in the air into the crowd of people, and I was absolutely petrified. And somehow, a very large guy was able to reach up and catch it before it hit somebody in the eye. So it can be an issue. Specific stage clear rules have been developed to respond to severe weather incidents like lightning, windstorms, and such. Drone use is restricted at Hempfest for public safety reasons. We instituted a community impact form on our website where people in the area, in the neighborhood, can upload photos and describe the time, place, and nature of a community impact, be it trash, noise, or some other disruption. Seattle Hempfest raises funds that are then transferred to the commissary accounts of specific Americans serving life in prison for nonviolent cannabis offenses. We supported George Monterano, for example, until his release. And we currently support Jimmy Romans, who got a life sentence that was just commuted, who has 18 more years to serve before he has any chance of release. We've spoken to Jimmy on the phone, and he's blown away that there are people selling cannabis in 9 states in some form, and he's in prison for doing the same thing. 18 more years he has to serve while he reads about all this industry and all this stuff that's going on. Retail stores, brick and mortar stores, you can walk in and buy cannabis. And he's not alone. There's almost 50 Americans serving life sentences for cannabis right now. Many people don't realize that. Seattle Hempfest is currently talking with representatives of the Washington Department of Traffic about participating in cannabis-impaired driving public service announcements, as the message coming from Hempfest might reach more skeptical young drivers. Lastly, Seattle Hempfest costs around $800,000 to produce. In 2014, we worked with a University of Washington professor to develop an economic impact study that revealed that Seattle Hempfest Festival patrons annually spend approximately $7.1 million in King County in relation to their visits to the festival. We did this to demonstrate that events such as Hempfest are economic generators. The same study indicated that our event supports as many as 120 regional jobs. And our 27 years of Hempfest can stand up against the accident, injury, or arrest statistics of any other Washington event of comparable size. We have 1,000 staff members on 118 crews. While Seattle Hempfest is a demonstration against prohibition, it's also a demonstration of what the cannabis community is capable of. Our community-powered event and our 1,000 staff members with 118 crews produces a world-class quality event and has done so again and again and again with nary a disaster or serious incident. And I think it's no coincidence that Washington was one of the first states to legalize cannabis along with Colorado, because you can't deny 100,000 people, supporters and participants, year after year after year. We literally have proven to many people, including the police that work our event, that cannabis events can take place, cannabis enthusiasts can come together year after year after year, and there's no issue. Imagine if there was 100,000 people drinking alcohol, or 100,000 people at Crack Fest or Meth Fest, Heroin Fest, even Coffee Fest, I think. With 100,000 people drinking coffee, man, I think there might be some issues. And I live in Seattle, which is, Coffee Central. And I should point out that last weekend, one of our licensed events just took place here in Arizona at the Red Rock Hempfest. I'm really sad that I missed it. In fact, there are Hempfests events in various places all over America of one kind or another. Not Category 5 protestables like Seattle Hempfest, but we're working on it. Took us almost 30 years to get where we are today. We just had a Hempfest event in the Sheraton Hotel in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They recently legalized medical cannabis there, the 30th state to do so. And of course, Canada just legalized cannabis nationally. But let's not forget that with one swipe of his pen, Jeff Sessions could end America's experiments for legalization in every state that has switched from prohibition. Literally, about 2 months, it could all be gone. All closed down. Don't think they wouldn't do it. I think it's highly unlikely that anyone's going to be able to put this cannabis genie back in the bottle, that prohibition is a freight train that's rolling downhill. But they've got the power. They've got the legal power. And immediately, they could just shut it all down. And if there's not some kind of huge impact in the next election, the Trump administration, Jeff Sessions, might just do that. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Of course, can you imagine the black market now? If they tried to shut it down, the kind of black market they would be dealing with, because we wouldn't all just go away. We can't afford to be cocky or complacent, though. That's my point. And I'm really hoping that now we're at a time that there is billions of dollars being generated, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. I believe that cannabis is going to dominate the world. You know, that there's so many aspects to this multifaceted plant. There's so many uses and applications for it in so many areas that at some point, everybody in the world, I believe, in the future is going to have cannabis in their life, touching them in some way. And that's why I would really hope, and I'll reiterate this point that I made earlier, that those that are really profiting, really doing well in the industry, will tithe some back to reform efforts and to the political reforms that we desperately need to finish this job. It's so important for the people that are suffering with the medical illnesses, that can't get their medicine in many states, and in some states that are reformed are still kicked under the cannabis. And it's so important to the thousands of men and women who are still in jails and prisons right now, that you know, they're looking to us to do that. Who else is going to do that? Who else is going to advocate for them? Who else has any resources to put towards this kind of thing, that care about it? It's the people in the cannabis industry. And let's not forget, again, the people in jails and prisons. They're the same people, most of them, that played a role in creating an environment where this cannabis industry could grow. They tilled the soil so this thing could be fertile enough to produce this amazing new industry that's going mainstream. Cannabis is different and unique. Cannabis is transformative. Cannabis is non-violent, non-addictive, although I totally admit